Zohra John, welcome to NexusTalk.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm really excited to talk about your journey of immigrating from Afghanistan, starting your new life in Canada, and building an incredible career in accounting. But before we jump into that, how would you like to introduce yourself to those listening?
Well, I'm Zohra. I was born in Afghanistan. I'm originally from there, and my family and I, we were refugees. So we left there in 2000, which we'll talk a little bit about later too. And so after we left there, we came to Canada, and I've been raised here. I went to school for accounting, and now I own my own accounting firm.
So we're going to talk about all of those things. But before we do that, do you want to tell us a bit more about your immigration journey of when you came to Canada and how that journey looked like for you?
Yeah, for sure. So we left Afghanistan when I was 4 years old in 1998, and we were forced to leave. It wasn't like we wanted to or it was our choice to. We had nothing with us, and that's the same story that a lot of other refugees have the same thing, where you don't take anything with you, just the clothes on your back. And we made a very long and difficult journey from Afghanistan to Pakistan. And when we were at the border in Pakistan and we were trying to get in, a lot of times you were at checkpoints and you had to pay money to get through these checkpoints. And the journey itself wasn't easy either. We were taking trains for many, many hours, and we were just on a train and they would stop very infrequently. And when they did stop, you would have to go and use the bathroom. Honestly, a lot of this I don't even remember. I was so young, and that probably had to do with it, but also it was kind of like a traumatizing experience, and I probably just blocked it out, but it was very difficult. And so once we got into Pakistan, we were there for 2 years, and the living conditions there were terrible. Even before we got to Pakistan, there was a period where we were living in refugee camps, like in tents with many, many other families that were in the same situation as us. And it kind of feels like looking back, we were basically homeless. Like that's what we were. We were living in tents. We had nowhere else to go. Yeah. We had no idea what the next step would be. And the conditions were terrible. Like it was just very dirty. There's no clean water. You can't just eat whenever you want. There's no blankets. Like it's just very harsh conditions. And I don't remember a lot of this. Like a lot of this is just my siblings telling me this. But like, can you imagine if you knew young kids, like 4 or 5 years old, and like putting them through that? It's very difficult, right? And even for my parents too, they had 6 kids. They were also not, like they were like just parents trying to take care of their kids and give their kids a better life. So it was very scary for them, very difficult, especially not knowing what your next step is, where your next home is going to be. And then we went to Pakistan. We were there for almost 2 years. And even living there, like it's a third world country. Like the place that you're living, it was very dirty. There's, again, no water. They would only have water for like a few minutes, like 30 minutes a day. And that's the only water that you get for the entire day. And those are kind of some of my early memories as a human and a child, is like living in those really bad conditions where there's like cockroaches everywhere. Like it's so smelly, you know? Like that's kind of my first memories of life, which is kind of sad, but that was the reality of it. And there were a few other like Afghan families that we knew that were also in Pakistan waiting to come to Canada. And I think that's a very common thing for a lot of people leaving Afghanistan. And then when we were there, we were very lucky. There's an agency called the Afghan Development Network, and they helped us get to Canada. And as part of that, it probably had a little bit to do with luck, being lucky to be selected to come here. But there were a lot of interviews that my family members would have to do. Like anyone that was an adult had to go through these interviews and actually show that they knew the language, they knew English. And then they did multiple interviews. And after almost 2 years, basically, we were lucky enough to be selected to come to Canada.
That's amazing. And you ended your answer on when you came to Canada. And, you know, there's a lot of struggles that a refugee or an immigrant goes through by, you know, the journey of how they get to the new country that they want to live in. But nobody really talks about how difficult it is to restart, to, you know, start a new life from scratch. But you were 4 or 5 at that time. Did you have, you know, memories of maybe experiencing culture shock or your family members and your journey of integration? Is there anything you'd like to share about
For sure. I think because I was so young, and when you're like young, you're 5, 6 years old, and you have these new experiences and you go to like a new place, it's kind of exciting and fun.
Yeah.
So for me, when I look back, when we first came to Canada, of course, it was a big culture shock. But I think for me, I was like, wow, this is a great new start for us. Like, this is so amazing. I'm going to go to school and like all these things. We have clean water. We have a nice bed. Like, for me, it was kind of nice. But definitely for my siblings, and there's a big age gap between me and like my eldest siblings too. They were like well into their teens, early adults. For them, it was definitely a big culture shock. Like growing up in Afghanistan, having friends there, having like a certain way of life there, and then all of a sudden you're in this new country, you can't speak the language, you have no idea how people dress, you have no idea how people act and what their values are and what the culture is like here. And a lot of my siblings were in high school. And high school in its own is very difficult to manage, and kids are very mean. And so like I definitely had firsthand experience of them having this culture shock and having a really hard time adjusting to like this new world. But I would say for me, like the biggest thing is coming here. We didn't speak English. Like I didn't speak English. I had to go to like ESL classes, like to learn English.
Yeah.
And even like the biggest thing for me was like, I was like, I have to learn English. And I did that by watching TV, basically, like cartoons, the Family Channel, Lizzie McGuire, all of it. Like I would watch it with subtitles just to learn English. And like, it's kind of funny that now kids watch TV because they're so addicted to it.
Yeah.
But I remember watching it so I could learn English and like actually make friends. And I feel like when you're young, I was lucky because I learned English so quickly. Like when you're young, you have that ability. But yeah, I can feel very lonely, especially when you're so young and you go to a new school and like no one wants to talk to you because you're like the new kid and you look different than everyone. Because like at this time, now Vancouver is like so multicultural and it's such a big melting pot. But at that time, it wasn't as diverse. And so you kind of do stick out when you're a refugee or an immigrant in like a predominantly Caucasian, community that you're in. So I definitely remember feeling a little like lonely and having no friends because I didn't speak English or like you dress a little bit different. So it was a culture shock, but I would say the bigger culture shock would be for my siblings that were, young adults and now they have this new life they need to adjust to.
I think when we talk, from my experience, when I've talked to other people who've gone through a culture shock in their journeys of integration, the one key thing that they've said that has helped them is the passage of time. And that's kind of passive. You just let it be. You take things one step at a time and one day at a time. But do you think there was something else? Do you think that, was there anything else that helped you in your journey of integration?
I think we were very lucky that we still had a lot of like Afghan family members. Like there were a lot of Afghan family members that came with us at the same time, like on the same plane. Like one of them was like Shukriya that you did an interview with before. So we were very lucky that we knew people that were Afghans and that we kind of like grew up with them and and we all had like this sense of normalcy amongst us that we were all in the same thing. And so that made it a little bit easier to not be so overwhelmed by culture shock and not like want to give up and like not want to like move somewhere or just not, assimilate into a different culture, just keep to yourselves. So I think that kind of helped like us keep in touch with Afghans and try to adapt at the same time to this new culture. But definitely the passage of time definitely helps. And I think now, like when I look at myself now, and I think when other Afghans see me, they see me as like a very Western person. That's only because I've been raised here. And so I can think that kind of speaks to the passage of time too. Throughout time, you become a lot more used to it. But I think when we first came, there wasn't that many Afghan members. But now when I see a lot of people come from Afghanistan more recently, there are so many Afghans. There's so many different like organizations that help them get settled. So it's a little bit easier in that aspect. And so it was kind of hard back then.
You mentioned that when other people meet you, the first impression that they get is you're too Western. I think that's a really funny thing, but it's also something that I want to ask about because I think it's not just something that you experience, but a lot of Afghan Americans or Afghan Canadians or Afghans who've just been to a new country for a long time and they've just been raised there. Do you think, how do you keep grounded in your Afghanness or how do you keep in touch?
I would say the biggest thing for me is me and my family, like being really close to my family. Because my parents have gone through this big culture shock, they are still Afghans at heart. And a lot of my siblings, because they were older and they were teens and adults, they still had a lot of that like Afghan upbringing, and they know a lot about the culture and traditions. So for us in our family, we still try to keep a lot of Afghan traditions in our family. We still like to partake in a lot of them. And so that helps us, stay as Afghans.
And you mentioned your parents. I want to talk about them as well, because I think so often in the immigration journey of a lot of families, it's the parents who take the toll really of taking the whole family to a new country and raising the kids there, navigating, the new country's culture and everything and how everything works. How do you think the resilience that they really, symbolized in their daily lives helped you in your education and in your work?
For sure. I remember my parents working very hard, like from a very young age. I remember they were always working hard, always going to work. And there was always very like minimum wage jobs. They weren't in here, they're not doctors, they're not lawyers, and they don't have good jobs, but they worked so hard from like my first memories of them. It taught me to also work hard. Like how hard they worked, it would be so irresponsible of me to not work hard now in my life. And especially the experiences that they have. I think a lot of times when like you and I are having this conversation now about my journey, sometimes we kind of forget how hard it was for our parents and how traumatizing it is for our parents to have to, and like at that time, they were like 40 years old. But it's so hard for them, like to have to move to a completely different world, different language, and on top of that, try to keep these 6 kids safe. And one of them is like so young, and they have to shelter them. So I think it was very hard for them, and that definitely teaches me that things are hard. You have to make sacrifices, and us, especially as Afghans, we like living in Canada or living in the States, we have such a beautiful opportunity to be able to live here and make something of ourselves, and to go to school, make sure we work hard, and we can give back to our community. We can make our parents proud. We can make Afghans proud. We can be a good example for each other. So watching them and how hard they've worked, it taught me to work just as hard, if not harder.
Have you ever felt a sense of pressure because of that?
Oh, for sure. I have, yes. Especially as the youngest of 6 kids. That maybe you relate to this or not. And someone that's been raised here, I feel like there is a sense of pressure that you should do really well for yourself, and you should go to school, and you should go to like a postgraduate program. You should have a good job. Yeah, that's a good question. I do feel a sense of pressure being the youngest and like having that opportunity to be raised here, that we should do well. And I think that, but you know what? I think that also pushes me to do well. And I think that's helped a lot get me to where I am today.
I'm gonna ask this as a wing it follow-up. How do you navigate between or distinguish between your aspirations as something that was your parents, your immigrant parents' dream, or what you want to do as what you want to do with your life? Because I think that this is something that a lot of newcomers who are in their teenagers may experience when they are in their college years, when they're choosing which university to apply to. So is there anything you'd like to share about that?
It's a very blurred line. I think that's actually a very good point. Being in the accounting field, you don't go into accounting because you're a risk taker. You go because it's safe, and you know what you're getting yourself into. You know what your salary will be. You know what your career will look like. So I would say that actually played a really big part in me choosing accounting, because I wanted to do something that was safe and I know would be a good career to have. I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of times when we're deciding where to go to school, what program to go into, we do keep our immigrant parents' dreams and hopes in mind.
And I think it really is different for each person. Maybe that dream really resonates with you. And I think that's the same case with me as well, but I'm sure it's different for everyone. Yeah. You mentioned that you're the youngest of 6. How do you navigate generational gaps with your parents, and what advice would you give to Afghan parents who just come to the new country. They're worried about how to raise their kids so they keep their Afghanness and also they don't fail in assimilating or, integrating into the new country. Any words of advice?
So to answer the first part of your question, how did I navigate it? I navigated it very poorly in hindsight.
Really?
Now that I'm an adult and I'm older, looking back, I navigated very poorly. But it was because I didn't know better at the time. But looking back, I did navigate that poorly. And I have lots of advice for people that are, kids dealing with parents that are Afghan, that are new here. And why I navigated it poorly is because when I was in my teens and like early 20s, my parents were very, very strict. And they had certain rules and the way that they were brought up is just so different than how I was brought up. And so at that time, I just thought that they were being so strict, they were so unfair, and I couldn't go out and my friends could always go out. And it just caused a lot of friction between me and my parents. And the other thing too that didn't help is that they did have me when they were older. So there was an even bigger age gap where they weren't as young and could adapt easily to this new culture that we were in. So it caused a lot of friction. And I think for my parents, they were just so worried about their child being, losing their Afghan side and being so Western, and they were kind of worried about that. So I think that's why they wanted to have a little bit of stricter rules and a little bit more control. So for a long time, it caused a lot of friction for us. But I think the advice that I would have for Afghan parents now that are going through the same thing is you need to have a little bit of more of an open mind with your child. Your child did not, if they were raised here, if they didn't choose to be raised here and not Afghanistan. It's just the reality of what you're dealing with. And with kids like Afghan or any immigrant kid that is being raised here in Western culture, there's so much influence from when they're going to school, spending all this time with their, Western friends. It's just inevitable that they're going to become more Western, and it's hard to still keep Afghan cultures in Canada because the cultures are so different. So I think Afghan parents now need to have more of an open mind, and they need to have more grace too. On both ends, kids need to give their parents a little bit more grace that this world that they're in is very difficult for them. As adults, when you're an adult, you're kind of set in your ways, and so it's hard to see a different way. And parents need to also give their kids more grace, that their kids are not rebelling against them or not being, there's no ill intention on either side. You're both just dealing with very different cultures. I think my biggest advice is having more open, honest conversations and knowing that the other side, no one has bad intentions. My parents didn't have all the tools to help navigate how to deal with me being raised here and what I was going through. And so they just did the best that they could. But I think in hindsight, I could have probably given them a little bit more grace.
So what I'm understanding is communication is key.
Communication is very key. And I think that's the big thing with Afghan families is there is no communication.
Yeah, sometimes.
And, either they don't know how to communicate, don't want to communicate. No one wants to talk about hard stuff. No one wants to talk about real stuff. But it is important if you want to have a good relationship with your child and for children to have good relationship with their parents too, you need to have open, honest communication. I think that's what kind of feeds into, maybe that's what caused the friction with me and my parents, is that as Afghans and in our family, we're not that open and we're not that communicative. I think that's very, very important.
I really liked your response because I think that leads me to the topic of therapy and how there's so much cultural stigma around it in Afghanistan, or people who come from Afghanistan, because we don't really realize that we go through so much in Afghanistan with the thoughts of, there's not security, there's a lot of things that are wrong in the culture and in the country. And you move to a new country and there's so much new things that you have to deal with. We don't give ourselves the time to really process those emotions and acknowledge that what was happening was really traumatizing and talk about it with our families. How do you think that affects, the process of integration, or how does that reflect in newcomer families?
I have a lot of thoughts. I think one thing that kind of comes to mind is Therapy is really good. It is inaccessible. It is kind of expensive, like especially when you're a newcomer and you're just trying to make ends meet. You live in a city like Vancouver where rent is $1 million and you're just trying to get by. It's kind of inaccessible. I'm sure there's lots of good programs that will help you get the therapy, but yes, you're right. There's a lot of stigma in Afghan, any like third world country or a lot of countries where therapy is like, oh, you only do that if there's like something wrong with you. Yeah. But I think it's very important for us to go to therapy. And to be honest, I have gone to therapy, and I think a lot of my therapy comes from being an Afghan and being an immigrant and trying to navigate like a different, sometimes it feels like within my family being raised here, I'm a certain way, and then everyone else in my family is Afghan in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's caused friction. Like we were talking about, that's caused friction with me and my parents. But I think even like with me and my siblings, a lot of them were like 20 years old. So they don't understand being raised here. And so I also have a very different values with them too. And I think being the youngest too, it's made me feel a little bit like an outsider in my family. Not that they did anything wrong or they intentionally made me feel that way. I think it could be something that I just brought on myself. But I think therapy is really important. And like now that I think back about like why did I go to therapy, I think a lot of it is because I feel like, who am I? Like I have this like kind of identity crisis where I'm like, I'm Afghan, my whole family is Afghan, but I feel like I'm more Western and I'm more Canadian than I am Afghan. And so therapy is really good because you can actually talk to someone that's impartial and you can kind of like vent about all these things. Like, especially like we were saying in Afghan families, a lot of times communication is not number one priority and there is no communication. But if you can just talk to someone about it, I think a lot of times too, we don't realize how traumatic our experience is coming here until you verbalize it and you tell someone that hasn't had that experience. And they're like, that's really traumatizing.
And you're like, no,
and you're like, no, it's normal. Like it happens to everyone.
And that's not everyone.
It's not everyone. Yeah. And like when you really think about what you had to go through to get here and like to leave those countries, those war-torn countries, and get here, it's very traumatizing. And I think that also plays into why I don't remember anything as a young child. Yeah, like because it was my very first memories, but I think it was very traumatizing that I've kind of blocked it out. But that's also why I wanted to have this conversation. I wanted to do this interview too, because we just don't talk about it. And therapy is not something to be embarrassed about. It seems very taboo in these cultures, but it's not. Like I don't go to therapy because like I have mental problems. I just go because I want to like tell someone about something and get unbiased opinions.
Feel free to add to this statement that I'm just going to say, but I think therapy serves two purposes. One, that it gives you the space to really process what you didn't process because it was just like normal, this happens to everybody. But also it's education because it helps you learn how to deal with those emotions, and it helps you develop, your emotional intelligence, which is something that's really crucial in healthy masculinity, healthy femininity in our culture, especially as we try to, integrate into the new culture that we're in. But what do you think about
For sure. I think like when I went to therapy, I was like in my late 20s kind of thing. I think up until that point is when I felt a lot of like friction still with my parents and feeling like this outsider. But I think like you're saying, when I went to therapy and I kind of was like talking about these experiences that we've had and like these experiences that I have, and I feel kind of alone, when you hear back from your therapist about, maybe why your parents were that way. Like one key thing that they told me that we talked about was that your parents had no idea, to be honest, what they were doing. And they didn't have the tools to give you the perfect life. They were really doing their best. And I think when you talk about it and you hear someone say that, and after hearing like your stories too, that is what helped me get a better perspective and like change my relationship with my parents, where I'm like, oh, they weren't just mean to me. They actually just were doing the best they can. They had they didn't have parents teaching them. Like my grandparents were all passed away. I never met them. Like they didn't have all these tools, all this education, and they weren't like mean people. They just really were doing their best.
Yeah. And that all of it goes back to education, right? That a country that has a good system of education, nobody's going to have to deal with therapy, or maybe they do, but for other reasons. But education is really key for both genders, so they understand themselves, and then they show up as like the best version of themselves to situations.
Yeah.
But speaking of education, you came to Canada, you dealt with all of those things, but you've also built a career through education and business, from getting your CPA to working at different firms and eventually starting your own accounting firm, Origin. How did being an immigrant shape the way you approach education, work, and leadership?
Yeah, I think I'll start with education. The biggest thing for me and what we're dealing with right now in the world currently is Afghan women can't go to school. They can't, even if they wanted to, they can't go to school. And so I knew I had to go to school because there are people in the world that would love to have this opportunity. And then again, it would just be so irresponsible if I just didn't take that opportunity and I didn't go to school just because I was lazy, just because I didn't want to. Education is very, very important, and especially for women too, especially for Afghan women. And so if you have that opportunity, you should take it. And, it might not be right for everyone, but I think getting an education and going into post-secondary, going into postgraduate programs, nothing bad can ever come from it. It can only better your career and educate you more. And I think in terms of like a lot of the experiences that I've had as an immigrant, and kind of like the pressure that we were talking about earlier, those are the things that I've kept with me, and that's helped me get to where I am today. Because watching your parents like have a very difficult time, like not being educated and working jobs that they don't want to work at and still working very hard at those jobs, it teaches you that, well, for me specifically, it taught me like I don't want that for myself. I need to do better. I need to go to school. I need to have a good career so I can actually make my parents proud and like make our family proud and make other Afghans proud. I can be an example for other Afghans in the community, for newcomers, for younger Afghans that are looking up to Afghans, because sometimes, especially as Afghan women, there aren't so many role models of people like going into higher education and like having their own business, especially too. We can probably list a handful of Afghan women that have their own businesses, but all of these things, someone needs to do them, and like someone needs to lead the way and be an example for other Afghans.
And you said you wanted to be a role model, and that's what you're doing right now. You are a role model, so I want to thank you for your time for doing this. I've really enjoyed this conversation, but of course there's a lot more questions to come. So we'll just take a short break and we'll be right back.
Okay.
So owning your own accounting firm with your partner is a huge accomplishment. Can you tell us a bit more about what you do and what did it take to get here?
Yep, for sure. So at Origin Accounting, we provide fractional controller services. So we work with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses on all of their accounting needs. A lot of these businesses, they don't need a full-time controller or a full-time accountant in-house, but they need that financial expertise to help them get to the next stage, to help them understand their business better. So we work with them on a fractional basis. We work with lots of businesses of various sizes, for-profit, a lot of nonprofits as well, and we get them the expert advice that they need in all finance and accounting related areas.
And we were talking before the interview, and you said that for accounting, you don't really need to be great at math. Can you tell us what skill sets people need to get into for accounting?
To get into accounting, you don't need very many skills, and definitely math is not one thing. I think people assume when you're an accountant, you have to be a math wizard. I'm not good at math.
Okay, this is surprising.
It's very surprising. Whenever I tell people that I'm an accountant and I'm not good at math, they're like shocked and their jaws to the floor. But I was saying, like, I think people think that as an accountant, I just sit at my desk all day and I just punch numbers and like calculate things. That's a big part of being an accountant. But honestly, the accounting field is so vast. There's so many different areas you can go into. And I have Excel, I have a calculator. I don't need to know 102 times 87 off the top of my head. There's a lot of people that do have that, and there's a lot of accountants that have that kind of knowledge, but you don't need that. And I'd say being an accountant, it gives you so much flexibility. Like, it's, not the most exciting, not the most risk-taking career, but it's very rewarding, and you get out of your career what you put into it. So the harder you work in your career, there's so many different areas you can go to, and it's limitless what you can do in accounting. So there's not that many specific skill sets that you need. And I think that's what makes the career very, inclusive and open to anyone.
Any advice for maybe Afghans who are like in their college years thinking about what career path to choose for accounting, maybe, if they're interested?
To be honest, I went into accounting because I felt like I wasn't smart enough to go into like medical school or law school. So I was like, this is the next best thing. So I think, maybe if that resonates with you, accounting is a really great field. A lot of people think it's like so boring and are like, oh, accountants. I don't find I'm like that. Like, I'm not boring, and accounting is actually can be very stressful sometimes. And there's a lot of problem solving that you have to do. And especially with Origin too, we work with a lot of different businesses and we manage their finances and manage their cash. A lot of people like need an accountant, and you are like the lifeline for a lot of businesses, and you are the lifeline for entrepreneurship. Anyone that wants to start a business, the only thing that's common across every business is the need to have an accountant, and you need to have your finances in order. So yeah, I'm so sorry. I forgot what the question was. For people that want advice about like if they want to go into accounting is very rewarding. But I would say if you are in high school and you're considering if accounting is a good field, accounting definitely is, but you'll get the most out of accounting if you do your CPA program after you do get your degree as well. So I would say that's very important. Going into postgraduate, no matter what, I would say is important, and that's what will help you get to the next step in your career. Like nowadays, it's sometimes not enough to just have a degree and just to go to post-secondary for 3-4 years and that's it. You always need to be learning. You always need to be challenging yourself and getting more education if you do really want to become successful and you do want to become a vice president one day, a CEO, a CFO, whatever it is that you want to do.
You mentioned first option or option A for you was medical school, and then you realized maybe accounting isn't it field to go into. Do you have any like general advice for Afghans, newcomers, especially who've done like high school in the new country? They're a little bit new to the culture still and the education system. Any advice for them in like choosing a college major in Canada, US, wherever, Europe?
I would say the biggest thing is, don't push yourself so hard. If you know that you don't like biology, chemistry, don't go into medical fields and like start getting a degree in health science and whatever it is. So know yourself, know what your interests are, and let that help guide you to what program you want to go into, because you do need to be interested in your program or you're not going to do well in class. And it's you're paying for this education. This education is not cheap either. So definitely keep that in mind, what your interests are. And going into finance, going into business, it's like a really good option, because when you're going into business, like getting a bachelor's of business administration, it gives you a really good base foundation for knowledge of, especially if you want to become a business owner one day. And I think that is really important for future generations too. A lot of, whether you're an immigrant or not, if you want to become really successful and that's what you want in life, sometimes being an employee is not the way to go. And that's why I started my own firm, because I was an employee for so many years, but I knew where I wanted to go in life. I couldn't achieve that by being an employee and working for someone else. And having that business background, it definitely helps you have your own business and start your own business. So if there are high schoolers right now, they're considering where they should go to school, I think one advice for me is I didn't go to like the traditional university of like UBC, SFU, UVic. I went to BCIT, but I went there on purpose because they have very practical, hands-on experience. They actually get you ready to get out into the workforce. And if I had to do it all over again, I would choose BCIT again, because they have very intensive full-time programs where you're in school from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., classes all day. But the big thing for me was that they let you can finish your degree in 3 years instead of 4 years.
Okay.
Because I didn't go to school right out of high school. I took some time off to like work and figure out what I wanted to do, and I didn't like rush into going into any program. So I was a little bit older, and I was just like, I need to get and move on with my life. So I think that was the best thing for me, but it taught me resilience, it taught me pressure, stress, working under tight deadlines. And I might not have gotten that experience if I went to traditional SFU, UBC. So I would say a lot of times students are kind of pressured into going into these big name schools and taking on all these huge student loans and like having that on their resume. I would say even as an employer, as someone that hires other people, if I have 2 resumes and one's at UBC and one went to BCIT, that's not a big factor for me. What stands out is what you actually, the way you carry yourself, what experiences you have, how you can speak to your experiences, what you actually did with your education. So I would say don't focus so much about what school to go to and putting so much pressure on yourself to get into like the perfect school and picking the perfect program. When you're young, you really don't know what you want. And a lot of times you face a lot of pressures from everyone to pick something and make sure that's what you want to do and that's the program you have to go to. But we don't know what we want to go to. And like statistically, you change your career anyways throughout your life. But I would say have a more open mind to getting an education that works for you. And don't be so pressured by everyone else telling you to go to certain schools, do certain programs. Because at the end of the day, it's your life.
Yeah.
And you need to deal with the consequences. And you are the one that's studying. A lot of times you're the one paying for it if you don't have parent support or you don't want to take on student loans. So it has to be something that feels right for you.
All that is really great advice for all students listening right now. I want to go back to what you said about being an employee and for people who have aspirations of becoming business owners, right? Do you think that amount of time that you spent as an employee helped you in, helped you gain the experience to carry that into starting the firm, or do you think that you would skip that part? Like after getting your education, you would start the firm?
100% it helped me. And sometimes I think maybe I should have like continued a little bit more, gotten a little bit more knowledge before starting the firm. But I think being in accounting, it's so technical. You need to know a lot of technicalities and you need to go through these certain scenarios and learn how to deal with those things. And I wouldn't have gotten that if I wasn't an employee. So I do really value my time as an employee and working for a lot of these organizations, especially when I was at PwC. It was very stressful, and a lot of people that are interested in accounting, they know like these big 4 firms, it's very stressful to work for them. It's also very hard to get into those programs, like into those jobs too. But that experience that I have for those 3-4 years, that's what's helped me get to where I am today. It was very stressful. Like we were working like 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week. And then even when you're doing your CPA program, sometimes I would be working 50 hours a week and then studying all weekend for the CPA programs, and you're doing assignments and you're doing exams and tests for like, half the year basically. So it definitely helped. And I think if you want to start your own business, that's amazing. But if you're in very technical areas like accounting or law or whatever it is, you need to get as much information and absorb as much information being an employee, learning from other people, because having your own business is very, very, very hard. I think everyone knows having your own business is hard, but until you own your own business and you're in it, you don't understand how hard it is until you're actually really in it. But at the end of the day, what we all want, everyone that starts their own business and goes into entrepreneurship, we deal with a lot of these heartaches and like hardships right now because we know one day, we hope one day it'll all pay off.
Yeah. And I was just going to ask about any advice you might have for Afghan women or just women who are newcomers to other countries, if they have aspirations of starting their own businesses. What do you have to say to them?
Go for it. I think the best time to do it is probably yesterday, and the next best time is to do it today. I think a lot of Afghan women have this sense of like, women in general, and even more immigrant women have the sense of like imposter syndrome, where they think they're not good enough, or they think that everyone will look down on them maybe, or like not trust them, and whatever the case is. But you are your biggest advocate and you're your biggest cheerleader. So as long as you are confident in yourself, others will also be confident in you. But it all starts from you. And I think like the biggest thing I would say is owning your own business is not easy, but that shouldn't deter people from going after that and creating that life for themselves. If that's what they want to do, just go for it. The worst that can happen is it doesn't work out and you go back to being an employee, but the knowledge and the experience that you get from having your own business, you'll never get that until you're actually doing it yourself.
That is really inspirational. Thank you for sharing that. To change the topic up a little bit, Do you have any idea about AI and its impact in accounting, since it's the field that you're active in?
For sure. I think AI is playing a big role in a lot of fields, especially accounting too. I would say the thing with accounting though is a lot of the the base bookkeeping work that you're doing, AI could help with that, but AI will never understand the true the true nature of these accounting transactions that are happening. So it can assist accounting for sure, but honestly, I feel very safe in my role as an accountant. Until AI gets to a place where it's a lot better than it is now. But accounting, there's a lot of judgment and there's a lot of different things that you need to keep in mind. It's not so black and white that AI can help take over and like accountants are going to lose their jobs. So I would say it's a very safe field to get into, and there will always be a human side to accounting.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that'll help assure a lot of our listeners who may be afraid that AI is taking over, stealing our jobs, as one of those people is me. But I still don't know what career I want to go into. But still, thank you for sharing that. We might switch topics for now, but I was really wondering, this question is going to be a bit of a big one, and I was scared to ask this because I think it's a bold question, but I think a lot of Afghan Americans, Afghan Canadians, Afghans in general who've grown up in another country might feel a little too privileged because they haven't gone through a lot of hardships compared to other Afghans who might be newcomers to the country that they're living in. Have you ever felt this, and how have you dealt with that?
I think I feel that all the time. I feel very privileged that I got to be raised here, especially when I look within my own family and I see like my older siblings, they didn't have that, like luxury of being raised here. And learning English for them at such an, like when they were 20, it's kind of hard. Like, as you can imagine, like now when we try to learn a different language, it's hard. And they're like forced to, because that's the only other language that they can really use to communicate. So I feel privileged in that sense. And the other sense too is, I think a lot now, because I've been in Canada for so long, I feel like, it's hard for me to like, there's so much happening in Afghanistan right now, so much heartache and so many bad things happening that sometimes I feel very distant from it. And I feel like, I feel privileged that I live in this wonderful country that has free speech and we're all safe and we can go to school if we want to, we can work if we want to, we don't need to have a male escort us outside. And so I feel privileged in that sense, and it like makes me feel kind of bad. Like I should, why do we get to live this when there's so many people living in such poor conditions in Afghanistan, and like we're lucky. So it makes me feel kind of guilty sometimes.
Survivor's guilt?
Yeah, survivor's guilt. Yeah. That, I live such a wonderful life where like my worry for the day is like, I'm so stressed about this bill payment, like whatever, like something minor like that, versus people in Afghanistan are worried about like dying every day and like if they'll survive for tomorrow. So definitely I feel very privileged, and at times a lot of immigrant kids that have been like raised here carry a lot of guilt that we live such a privileged life.
And I think that can be really uncomfortable for people who have gone through things, but they're now at a place of safety and they're not in the state of like survival mode all the time. But I think that we deserve that, even if we think that maybe there are other people suffering. But when we try to do acts of service and we try to give up our time and our volunteering and do the acts of service and for the people who are suffering, I think that kind of pays off, and that kind of, for me at least, that helped me feel less guilty now that I'm in Canada.
Yeah, but like even now there's so many Afghans that are coming to Canada like now. I think if we can all just try to help them, like when we came, we did have a lot of support from different organizations to help us get used to like this new culture and like help us find out where to get groceries and all this stuff. So I think if we can do that back, like you said, it helps you feel better that you're actually giving back and you're helping these other people that are also lucky enough to come to Canada or the States.
Any parting words of wisdom for Afghan girls who are in Afghanistan, who have been banned from going to education for more than 4 years, Afghan women and girls who have been displaced after the fall of the country, or Afghans in general?
I think what I would say is it's very hard for me to I think what Afghan women are going through in Afghanistan is very difficult, and I can't even imagine what they're going through, but I think as Afghan women in Canada, and you have this opportunity to have an education, you have to take that opportunity, because it would be very irresponsible that you have this opportunity and you don't go after it. Because like I was saying earlier, a lot of people would kill for that opportunity to be able to go to school and to do what they want, have a career, whatever career that they want. And so it's very important for us to take that opportunity. And a lot of Afghan women, I don't know what it is, I don't know what it is, it's just culture in general, but I find not a lot of Afghan women go into post-secondary, they don't pursue higher education. A lot of people do, of course, a lot of Afghan women do, but not everyone does. And I don't really know why that is, but I think we need to change that narrative, and we need to change that, how we are in the Afghan culture, and we all need to go to school. We all need to get a better education.
Zohra John, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This has been so fun. I have learned so much from you. Thank you for taking the time to do this with me. And I hope it's been inspiring and informative for all of our listeners as well. I hope you've had a great time. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I think the biggest thing for a lot of Afghan, teenagers, young kids that are here, it's very difficult. I think a lot of times, even for me, especially even now I'm a full grown adult, and I still feel that way, but it can feel a little bit lonely sometimes if you don't have siblings that are very close in age to you or going through the same thing as you. And also in Afghan culture in general, even if you do have siblings in the same age, you have a lot of close friends, you don't necessarily talk about these traumas and these hardships that you go through. But I think the biggest thing in my experience is being raised here. I know a lot of other Afghan people that are also raised here, and it can feel kind of isolating and alone, and you can have this sort of identity crisis of I'm not Afghan enough, I'm not Western enough, who am I really? But a lot of immigrant kids feel that, and I think we should know that we're not alone, and there's always someone that they can talk to. I'm here if they want to talk to me, because it's not something that we should carry ourselves and we should go through alone. But I think it's something that we let immigrant kids kind of bury down, and they don't talk about it, and they don't let it come to surface. And I think that's also when we were talking about therapy, therapy can really help with those feelings and getting a better idea of who you are. But I think that's a very common thing amongst immigrant kids, is having an identity crisis of who am I really? But we all go through it, we're all navigating, we're all trying to get through the day and make the best of the situations that we have, but no one is alone.
Yeah, and thank you for opening up and sharing the space to talk about those things. And I hope that this conversation, inspires and motivates people to have these conversations in their families, with their friends, in their communities.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's why I wanted to do this interview, because, whether I didn't look out for it, whatever the case is, but I never hear about Afghans talking about these awkward conversations, these difficult conversations. But I want this to be, a space where we can talk about it. It is our reality, and we shouldn't be ashamed of it or shy about it or shy away from it. It's the reality of a lot of our lives, and it's a lot of this experience that you have and I have. A lot of other people have that same experience, and as an Afghan culture, we just need to be more open about it and talk about it more.
Yeah,
and educate the Western world too about these experiences that we're going through. I'm sure your experience coming to Canada was very, very difficult, and same with mine. And there's no easy way to leave Afghanistan and to come to Canada. I think people, if they're not aware, they don't have experience with people that have gone through that, they think that we just get on a plane in Afghanistan, land in Canada. That's not how it works. You go through a lot of bad people, difficult situations, a lot of uncertainty, unknown. Having no clothes, having no family, having no friends, having no water. You go through a lot of these hardships to get to where you are here today.
that shapes the person that
Exactly.
you are today. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that again with us. I've had such a great time.
Me too.
Till next episode of Nexus Talk, stay informed, stay inspired.